So I'm reminded of that Benjamin Franklin saying, a stitch in time saves nine, which is that really you have these great ideas, but do the stitching, do the checking, have the discipline to check it out first before you take it to production. And that also reminds me of my work back at Intel. We used to always have to kind of really check how well that idea would work. And just before we kind of go back into this, I want to describe, so Intel was one of those semiconductor companies that really worked out how to make big margins, make a lot of money out of semiconductor production, where a lot of their competitors really had a lot of trouble. And Bridge is really telling me, how did Intel do it? They applied the rigor. They did the stitch in time to save the nine. Before they went to execution, they did a lot of testing.
Yes, and I think we'll see, or you'll find that wherever the stakes are really high, sending a rocket to the moon, or building a space lab, or building a drilling rig and putting it somewhere, wherever that happens, we as humans, we've learned, we actually have to go check the science out. We've got to do the engineering properly. We can't have airplanes falling out of the sky or oil rigs exploding. And it happens every now and again. There are terrible accidents, but we really avoid most of them. I mean, if you think about how many machines we build as humans, what we do with them, we do avoid most of them because of this certainty thinking and using it before we actually implement. It's in our day-to-day lives. You go home. You are a future thinker. Your spouse is a past thinker. That's where the conflicts seem to affect us on a personal basis. And I think that's where the bridge can be most crossed most successfully, by simply understanding that we all are bringing value to the same thing, human thinking. And all three of these fundamental thought patterns actually contribute. None of us has all of the answers, and all of us actually are participating or can participate collaboratively. So can you imagine actually welcoming the difference that someone brings into your life in their thinking as opposed to rejecting it? And can you imagine also celebrating it in such a way that, no, the certainty thinkers are not stick in the muds any more than the future thinkers are flakes. It's just the nature of the thought patterns, and all of them together create our whole thinking. And that's really what we need to start paying attention to.
So I think we also want to think about what's the effect on the probability people, the ones at the top of the triangle, because the probability people are seduced by the charisma of the possibility people. They say, oh, I love that feature. I'm just going to go and do it. And so they almost need to say, I love that picture, but I don't want to try 10 things that don't work. Give me just 5 things that don't work.
Well, yes, and I think we all want a better future. And you know, it's no different. The probability thinkers, they want to make it work. They're running the air traffic control systems and designing in our cities. Everybody wants to create a better world. The question is, do we take, as you said, the stitch in time and actually have information that is real coming from certainty thinkers and handing it up into the plan? Or is there really no consequence whatsoever, in which case we can iterate, we can put lots and lots of ideas and test them very, very, very quickly indeed, and then measure them. And it's just two different ways of thinking about it depending on what's at stake. The key is to always remember that all three of these have value to bring. And if we have high stakes, and even moderately high stakes, it really helps us to be clockwise, to really use time in a way that is going to save us a lot of pain at the end of the day and a lot of time and energy.
So, recap for us, getting wise. Let's get wise about time. So if you had to kind of help us, what have we covered? And I think you've done a fabulous job introducing us to all these new patterns of thinking. What's our takeaway? How do we be wise about time and patterns of thinking?
I think the most important thing to remember, and it's sort of at the risk of repeating myself a little bit, because it's such an important thing, all human beings think, all human beings have value to bring. If we understand people's thinking patterns, their preference towards future, present, or past thinking, what we do is we begin to recognize their real value, and we can change our expectations. I may walk into a room and have a certain expectation, but is that realistic, given that I'm speaking with a probability thinker that doesn't want to hear my latest idea on a Monday morning? On Friday, they thought they had a plan for next week. It's not fair to come in and change it. So What this allows us to do is to recognize our expectations and to own them as our expectations and to become far more realistic about how people interact, what they bring of value, and how to use them successfully in the right roles and right positions, including in a simple meeting. So if I were going to have a meeting, I wouldn't start a meeting without actually saying, let me draw a little map and let's actually see who is where in this map so we can understand what value will they bring. And even more to the case, are we missing an entire set of patterns? Do we have no certainty thinking, in which case we may come out of that meeting thinking we've got the best idea since sliced bread, and actually it's the worst idea we'd ever could have come up with, but we just had nobody asking the question, is that real?
So practically, are we thinking that each team should have members with different patterns of thinking? Would those be stronger teams?
Rule of thumb, yes. However, given a certain situation, there is certainly people from these three different patterns who will be able to deal with that. If you're sending a rocket to the moon, you need a lot of engineers.
Yes.
You don't want a lot of people speculating with ideas the whole time. However, if you're trying to invent a new product and brainstorming, you probably want more future thinkers in the room and probably not as many certainty and probability. But at the end of the day, I think the caution is we need to have all three working together collaboratively, using their strengths and coming together by understanding and having the right expectations and the right language to actually start communicating more effectively.
So let me give you two situations. One situation is I understand patterns of time thinking, and I go in with my team, and my team doesn't understand that. So I can kind of take into account what the ways people are thinking so that I can facilitate us moving around in a clockwise manner. So that's one possibility. The other possibility is where every member of the team knows this. How would that work?
Well, I personally think that this is an awareness that all human beings should have. We become aware of ourselves as children, we become aware of our habits and our manners. I think this is just another piece of information. And frankly, I've worked with 7 and 8 and 9-year-olds, and they seem to get this much more quickly than the 60, 70, and 80-year-olds. And I think it's because it's very useful. It actually allows young people to understand the roles that they play and why they see the world the way they do, why they enjoy the things they like and why they perhaps don't enjoy some things and why they might resist them. I think at the end of the day, the really important thing is the awareness of this changes the nature of outcomes. The more people in an organization who actually understand that thinking, we're not all the same, and we're not talking about personality here, we are talking about thought patterns, and that the differences in our thinking actually come together to create whole thinking. And the more awareness we have, the more we start designing our meetings, our processes, our organizations, the roles that we occupy in those organizations, based on something really real, which is thinking and the thought patterns that we have.
So I think what you're saying is that there are many dimensions of thinking. There's the personality part, but there's also this time way of thinking. So you could be an introvert and have any of these patterns. You could be an extrovert and have any of these patterns.
There tend to be relationships between them. The certainty thinker is more introverted, the possibility more extroverted. But at the end of the day, yes. Thinking.
Well, this has been fabulous. You've opened our minds to a whole new way of thinking. I love this way of thinking about time, and it's beautiful. Thank you so much for joining us. And this is it for Just Picture It today, and thank you for joining us.